Hey guys, I'm back with part 3 of the Southwest Clash Chess Championship. Sorry for the late upload. It's been a while since I uploaded my part 2, and this is the last and final part. Unfortunately, I have been pretty busy recently, but I'm gonna get better at this. I'm gonna be better with my schedule. I'm gonna try to upload more videos more consistently and more daily. So in this round, I'm playing against Andrew Jiang. I've drawn so many games in a row at this point. How many games was it? One, two, three, four. I've drawn 4 games in a row. I really wanted to win, but I was coming off my game against Rose Atwell where I drew a winning position. I had many opportunities, a lot of opportunities blown. So I was really hoping I could beat Andrew. He's a 2250 rated player, high schooler, very strong, a very strong prodigy. And let's get into the game. So knight f3, knight f6. Oh yeah, and Andrew Jiang, I'd actually played him like in 2023, a few years back. I ended up being able to win that game with the black pieces, but here he goes for knight f3. Back then, I think he went for 1d4, and we played an Imzo Indian. So knight f3, knight f6, b3, and I try to play a reverse London setup. So what's the good thing about the reverse London setup? Even though it's really boring, it's also really solid. So it's pretty good when you're not prepared and you don't know what to do. And I didn't really do any preparation for this game. So I went to something which was really familiar for me. And something you could do is like pawn e3, but then I go e6, and I can develop normally, castle, and maybe have a strong bishop on f5. Instead, he goes knight h4, which is a very challenging move. Because knight h4 says, what are you going to do with this bishop? I don't want to just drop my bishop back, because then after he takes, he gets the bishop pair, which I don't want to give him. And also, if I move my bishop forward, he's just going to kick it back with h3. So I end up going bishop back to d7. In hindsight, maybe I should have went bishop back to c8, and if we went knight back to f3, maybe just play a different move, like c5 or e6. But I go bishop d7, and I walk into some preparation here. Because he goes c4, and now you can see that the difference between my bishop on d7 and my bishop on c8 is that when he goes c4, my d5 pawn is under attack, and my queen is basically not able to protect the d5 pawn. So I can't go d4 in this position, because if my bishop is on c8, I'll be able to go d4 since my queen protects the d4 square, which would make c4 a bad move. Instead, the best move is to go knight c6, but there's this really long engine line after bishop takes f6, it takes f6, takes on c4, knight b4, knight c3, and bishop g4, preventing the e4 move. White goes pawn to f3. I guess pawn h3 maybe runs into some knight d3 check, and the queen is lost. So f3, and he ends up a pawn. I get a ton of compensation. This position is really messy. No clue what's really happening here, but it's hard to find these lines over the board, so I really wasn't able to go for this pawn sacrifice. Instead, I go for e6, just developing. He brings his knight back, and now I make a really bad move. I go d takes c4, and why is this such a bad move strategically? Because I give up one of my central pawns for one of his wing pawns, and since he has a pawn on b3 already protecting the c4 pawn, once he takes back, he gets control over the semi-open b file with his rook in the future. And he can also go a4, a5, anytime I try to push my b pawn up, basically using my pawn as a hook. And also when his bishop gets to g2, he's going to have a lot of control in this diagonal since there's no d pawn blocking it. I go c5, he goes bishop g2, and I put my bishop on c6, trying to contest his bishop. We make a few more moves and develop. And he does this interesting thing where he puts his bishop on c3 and his queen on b2. The idea is that he wants to put pressure on my g7 pawn in the future. I'm still playing normal moves, and here there's a lot of arrows, but you can kind of see White's ideas are moves like knight a3, knight b5, getting his knight to a better square, even a5, a6 in the future, trying to open up the b file and the a file, where my a7 pawn could be weak and my queenside could be weak. So already here, White has a bit of an advantage. I go rook b8, preparing to go b6 if he ever goes a5, so that my rook is on the same file as this queen. He goes knight bd2. Now I try to trade off some pieces due to my lack of space, and here he goes knight e5, which I have as a dubious move. And why did I think it's so strange? Because I thought in this position, White has more space. He should just be playing to attack me on the queen side, with moves like a5 and a6, and rook b1. Instead, he tries to trade off pieces, and you can see in the next few moves, I'm able to get pieces traded off, and all of a sudden, like scores such as c6, d6, d7, e7, where my pieces used to be, they're empty now, and I have space to maneuver. So I go knight d6, which I thought was a pretty good move here, preparing to go knight f5 and knight d4. He goes to e4. I go b6, and now I go knight b7, preparing to go knight a5 and remaneuver my knight to c6. We make a few more moves. And I missed the idea of f5 here, which I thought could potentially be really dangerous for him, and I'm pretty happy he didn't play it. There are some really complicated lines here after a move like rook takes f6, although the computer does think that things are really working out for black here after the cool move king f8, where I have a lot of stuff, knight d4, queen g3, etc. But, you know, I was kind of scared of some of these lines in the game because it looks like my king is getting really exposed. Even if he goes rook e1 and adds attackers, the position is not that clear. Despite that, he thinks for a long time and goes queen b5. And I was a little bit shocked by this move. I'm like, what is your queen doing on b5? But I did not punish it correctly, unfortunately. I go rook c8. And here, all I needed to do was take on e5. And after bishop takes e5, I can go queen b7, queen d7, queen e7, anywhere. The idea is I just want to go knight c6 next. But instead, I go knight c6, and I trade off pieces in the wrong way, because now he can swap his queen off the board. And we get a position like this, where this rook endgame is a bit better for white, due to the fact that he's the one who controls the pawn break with pawn a5, and has a lot more space on the king side. I go f5, closing up the position, and here I make a terrible, terrible, terrible move. I play a5. And only once I played this did I realize how difficult the situation had gotten for me, because after his next few moves, you can see here, yeah, I did stop his pawn break, but he just doubles on the b file, and my rooks are like this. They're both protecting the b pawn. Like, is that how rooks are supposed to function? No. Because if I try to protect my rook by playing my pawn on b6 by playing rook b8, he can go rook b5, and a threat like rook takes a5 is already unstoppable, and white gets a winning rook endgame. So I go rook a6, keeping the b6 pawn protected. He goes king f3. And here I just shuffle around a bit. Honestly, this was a very passive position. And we played this game on for like 3 or 4 hours. We were the last game in the playing hall. But this is like a pretty miserable position. You can see even though the material is equal, the engine says +4, as if white's up 4 pawns and completely winning. That's because my pawns are really poor quality. My rook is very passive. And once he makes the f5 pawn break at the right moment, I'm going to lose. So we play a few more moves, and I'm just shuffling back and forth, just trying to keep everything protected. Here, a move like f5 would have won. What he maybe was scared of was if he goes king d5, it gets a little bit complicated because I can maybe push my f pawn up in the future and my rook gets in. But at the same time, a word of advice in chess is when you're trying to win a game, you do have to take some sort of risk sometimes. The win is just not going to come to you freely. And you can see in some of my past games where I wasn't able to win my winning positions, it's because I wasn't able to take those risks, right? So king f4 would have been the move here to win. And the idea is that I'm just so stuck. Like after a move like rook c7, he can take on c6, take, and then now after king takes f5, a move like rook g6 is unstoppable. My 2 pawns on h6 and g7 can barely even be considered pawns. h5 just controls them completely. So yeah, a move like f5 would have been really strong. Instead, he goes king e3, and we shuffle around for a very long time. You can see now he finally pushes f5, although the circumstances aren't as good. And this is due to the fact that his rook is on b1 and not on g6. Takes, and I go rook d7. I don't want to trade off this rook, obviously. This would be a huge blunder, because now rook g1, rook g6 is impossible to stop. His e-pawn is really strong, and I have no counterplay. So I keep my rook, I go rook d7, preparing to go rook d4, and rook e6 potentially. And after rook g1, I go king e8. And he goes king e3, rook e7, and now I find this idea of going rook d6, preventing any king d5 ideas, and also taking advantage of the fact that I have a pin with my rook so that he can't take my rook. And we play a few more moves here, and I missed the best way to draw, which would have been rook e6, and followed by g6. The idea is that he can't really bring his king in, because otherwise he would lose due to the fact that I have a passed pawn. And he's forced to take, and now that I finally get rid of this really annoying h-pawn, like this draw should be pretty simple. I just prevent him from moving his pawn to e6, because I can always take on e6. And yeah, besides that, there's not really much white can try here. If he ever goes d4, I can just take. Instead, I go rook d7, completely missing his king e3 move. King e7, rook f1, and now he maneuvers his rook to the b1 square and attacks b6. And we get into another endgame where I'm a bit worse. and practically speaking, it's quite hard to hold. I do find some good resources here, but unfortunately, I had to find king f4 here, running away from both of his pawns, which with no time is like pretty hard to see. The idea is that if he goes rook h5, I can go h3, and I can basically draw this position, because my pawn is always threatening to promote, and his a pawn is never going to be able to promote due to the fact that I keep checks permanently. And if his king runs, I just keep attacking the pawn. And he never has time to push his c pawn, because I can always just take his a pawn. But I miss king f4, and I go king e6. And after king e6, rook a8, h3, rook h8, king e7, I get a losing position once again. And I can't remember the rest of the game from here. This is my fault. I should have had my notation and should not have lost my score sheet, but I ended up losing it. Although I was somehow able to get my king into the corner and draw the game. Like, my king went to c8 and b6, and I ended up holding rook versus rook c and a, which is technically a draw. But yeah, a very topsy-turvy game. My opponent was completely winning at multiple points, but I was able to swindle him into a draw. So I was really happy about that. My next game is against chess YouTuber Albert Fang. He was popping off this event, actually. He beat Francesco Sonis, who's a very strong Italian GM, and I believe he got his FM title from this event. Also a fellow chess YouTuber, so I'll put his link in the description below if you guys want to check him out. I start the game with one knight f3. It had been serving me pretty well this tournament, so I wanted to just get a game. Knight f6, and we transpose into some sort of a Queen's Indian defense, where generally black wants to go knight e4, d6, knight d7 in these positions, or even break with c5. He goes knight a6 in this position, which I thought was a little bit strange, because his knight's not really threatening to go to c5. But it did make sense in the later on when you see that black could maybe play d5, c5, and if I ever took on c5, he could go knight takes c5. So I just choose waiting moves. I don't want to go for knight c3, because if I go for knight c3, he always has moves like knight e4, and this is kind of what black is hoping for, to just trade off all the pieces, and white might have a very minimal advantage here, but it's not much. So castles a3, and I keep making waiting moves until he plays d5, then I trade. And the idea is that after he goes d takes d5, I actually have his bishop blocked. So his bishop on b7 is blocked by his own pawn, and this pawn could become a potential target for me in the future, so I thought here maybe I'm slightly better. c5, I go bishop g5, preparing to attack f6, and we both make some normal moves. I put my queen on a4, saying potentially in the future this knight on a6 might be weak. And after h6, captures, and rook d1, you can see all my pieces are pretty developed and centralized. The position is still equal, but black has to find moves like queen d6, I guess, which is not really easy. He found queen e7, preparing to move his rook to d8. But the main thing here is I was calculating knight takes d5 in the game, but I wasn't very happy with this move, because after bishop takes d5, queen takes a6, I thought, okay, like, I calculated this entire line with e3, queen e4, f3, and queen d5. And if we take a look at this position, we can see that white is up a pawn, but first of all, his king is pretty unsafe, and black's bishop is really, really strong, while white's knight, even though it is an outpost, it doesn't really have many future prospects. So black has basically more than enough compensation here. Even a move like h5, h4, just breaking open the king side can be very strong. Black can always wait as well. Maybe he has like rook d7, keep the a7 pawn protected, etc. So I go e3, he goes queen e6, and here I miss a very good opportunity to get a good position. I missed the move e4, which is funny because I'd been calculating e4 before. Like here, I thought maybe e4 could work, but unfortunately this just doesn't really lead to much according to the engine. Like maybe I can win the bishop back, but I'm likely going to lose my d4 pawn, so yeah. I thought e4 here wasn't great, but now e4 is really good because his queen is on e6, so when he takes on e4, I can go d5, and you can kind of see here that black's bishop is blocked, and after a few more moves, like if he ever goes knight c7 trying to reroute his knight, I have this really big forking the knight, forking the queen, the rook, the bishop, and it's just very hard for black to keep everything defended. So he would have to make a move like rook a d8 trying to prevent that, but even here, knight f6 just wins because the rook on e8 is under attack. So this would be really good. My pawn on d5 is very strong, and after knight takes e4, black is sort of lost positionally as well, because even if he plays the best move, which is rook e to d8, we can take a look at this position and see how well my pieces are placed. My pawn on d5 is just an impediment to his bishop. My knight on e5 is very centralized. My rooks are centralized. My queen is active. His knight is on the edge of the board. His rooks are doing nothing. White's just positionally winning here. But unfortunately, I missed the e4 concept again, because when you play a3, it's kind of weird to think about playing e4 next, although in that position I should have seen it. Now he goes knight c7, and now this e4 idea doesn't really work, because he can just take, and then I just lose my pawn due to the fact that the knight is attacked the d5 square. So I go knight e2, I reroute my knight, and now I do a very good sequence here. So I trade pawns. I give him the hanging pawn structure, which is basically two central pawns which can't really be protected. And after he goes knight e6, I go b4. And the idea here is black can never go d4, because black wants to go d4 due to the fact that if I go e takes d4, I'd lose my knight on f3. But here, I have this really nice move, knight takes d4, and after knight takes d4, he can never take back with the pawn, due to the fact that his queen is hanging. So I tricked him there a bit, and he goes bishop d8, I go queen b5, attacking his rook, and now he reroutes his bishop to b6. And we play a few more moves here, and you can see here that white is slightly better. And why is that? Because first of all, black has what's called an isolated queen's pawn, which can be a potential weakness. So if I can just target this pawn, he cannot protect this pawn with any other pawn. There's no pawn on e6. There's no pawn on c6 to protect d5. So not only can he not target that pawn, but if I can get enough pressure on that pawn, then eventually black's d5 pawn will collapse and I'll be up a pawn. So that's what I try to do here. But I go about it the wrong way. The best move here would have been bishop takes d5. The obvious idea is if bishop takes d5, knight takes d5, rook takes d5, he loses his rook on e8. But black can make the game really complicated with a move like bishop a6, where if I drop my queen back to say b2, he has bishop a5 ideas, and you can see my rook is kind of trapped, because if I move to the light square, then his bishop will take. So I have to go queen c6, and there's this really long line where I end up losing my exchange, but like after a move like rook c8, maybe bishop a5 is coming, although I still am up a pawn and I have a slight advantage according to the engine. This is probably what I should have gone for in the game, but I miscalculated and I went knight takes d5. The idea is if bishop takes d5, rook takes d5, I still win his rook in e8. But he has this amazing move, rook e5, which I did see, but the move that I missed was the following. I only calculated knight e4 here, which I saw him fine after queen b2, because now I'm up a pawn and he can't attack f2 anymore. The issue is he has knight e6, which attacks d4 and b5 simultaneously, and here all the pieces just trade off. Like, it's impossible for me to win this position, because after queen c6, knight takes d4, I end up losing my d4 pawn, and you can kind of see here that, like, this is an opposite colored bishop endgame, rook endgame, and after rook d2, rook f5, the game quickly ended in a draw. So this is another game where I got some pretty good opportunities to press or play for a win, but I missed some moves in the critical moment, which was pretty unfortunate, but at the same time, it happens, I guess. So going on into the last game against Shrita Swaran, I'm on 6 draws in a row now after starting with 2 wins. A little bit disappointing. Some of those draws, like the game against Andrew Jiang, I was able to hold from a worse position, but some other draws I really could have won had I pressed a little bit better. So Shrita plays e4, I play Sicilian, I wanted to win at all costs, win or lose. Spoiler result, I mean, actually I'm not going to say what the result was, but you guys can probably guess it. Anyways, we're playing a Najdorf here, which is a pretty sharp chess opening. She goes knight c3 though, instead of playing d4, which is the main line. The idea of knight c3 is that it keeps options open. So if I go knight f6, she can go d4 and transpose into the Najdorf. But she plays this e5 move, which is very common in blitz, but besides that, it's not played that often. And I actually forgot the theory here. I'd seen this move before, but I didn't remember that the move was a6 for black, preventing bishop b5, and then I have ideas of like bishop b6 or queen d6, trying to attack the e5 knight. Instead I go knight b7, and now after the next few moves, she ended up getting a bit of an advantage. D takes e5 would have been really good for her. The idea is after knight d5, she has the move queen f3, and already here I'm a bit worse because you can see she can go rook d1 next, bishop b5 check, knight e4, knight d6. Her development's very fast. But she goes bishop takes e5, I go a6, preventing any bishop b5 check ideas, and after d takes c5, we reach some sort of endgame, which I kind of got lucky to reach because I should have been much worse at a few points in this game. But Now Shrita goes b4 and offers me a draw. And a little bit of a backstory behind Shrita, I actually played her in one of my games to get my IM title. I played her in one of the rounds in a norm tournament, and I ended up quick drawing her. Like, we drew really fast because I was black and I was like, okay, I didn't want to risk losing, because if I lost, then maybe I might have not gotten my title that tournament. This was in 2023, but now I was more ambitious, so after knight d7, bishop e2, I play the game, and here I get a slightly better endgame. The idea is that if I take, I should go f5 and kick back her knight, and then after a move like knight c3, this b4 pawn and c2 pawn could be weak in the future. But I play this a little bit inaccurately. I go rook a2 immediately, for completely forgetting about king d2, which was an amazing move by her. I'd overlook this move. And the idea is that she connects her rooks and also protects the pawn. And the king on d2 is good in the endgame. There's no way that I can really attack it. I go f5, kicking back her knight. We trade a pair of rooks, and now I go rook d8. And here it looks very tough for black to win. Like, you can see my pawns are not really great. I have four pawns on this side of the board, but I only have one queenside pawn. It's not really easy to make something happen with this pawn structure, but I still wanted to try regardless, because what I thought is, okay, Magnus Carlsen would probably try to win this position as black, so I can too. Why not? She goes f4, stopping any potential e5 or g5 pushes. I go knight b6 and bring out my bishop. And here she had a really strong move. Bishop c6 threatening g2, but b5 would be really strong here, because I can't actually take on g2 due to the fact that she has rook g1. And if I drop my bishop back, then actually white's going to be the one playing for a win here. So I couldn't do that. Instead, she goes g3. And I play h6, preparing g5. And now I'm actually a little bit happier with my position, because now that a rook is on a3, my bishop can always hide on h1. And you can see here I go g5, trying to break open the king side. And my bishop is on a pretty good diagonal here. And now you can see she's retreating her knight. Her rook on a3 is a little bit awkwardly placed. It's not doing much now that her knight has moved and it's no longer protecting it. So I thought, okay, I can get a bit of an advantage here, centralize my king, maybe play knight d5 in the future. This f4 pawn can become really weak. She plays knight d4, allowing g takes f4, and now I knew that I had an advantage here, because you can see that white has 3 pawn islands. A pawn island is basically when pawns are not connected. So these pawns are connected. This would be one pawn island. Well, it's hard for me to draw the arrow, but like, yeah. This would be another pawn island, and this would be a third pawn island. So 3 pawn islands. And after c4, I go rook g2 check, and then I take on h2. And I'm up a pawn temporarily, but Ashrita did have a really nice defensive resource here, which she found: c5, king takes c5, knight takes c6, king d6, and knight g7. Now this is a very critical moment. I had a few options here. So the f5 pawn is under attack, and I am up a pawn here temporarily. But the first option that I calculated was knight c4 check, and this looks really fancy. The idea behind knight c4 is if bishop takes c4, I have rook h3, and I win the rook. And after knight takes f5, I go king d7. But after calculating this position in my head, I realized that it's not really easy for black to play for a win here, because white's idea is she's going to play f5, f6 next, and I don't really know how I'm going to win the f pawn. It's defended pretty well, and at the same time, her b pawn is blocking my b pawn. So I thought my winning chances were not all that great here, although there is like a computer line with rook f3, where I put my rook behind her pawn and I get some decent chances. But it's not as clear as the best move in the position, which would have been completely winning, in the move that I missed. Bishop e4. So this is a move that I should have seen, but I didn't, unfortunately, and you can see the engine says minus 2.5 here. The idea is that after bishop e4, well, first of all, she can't take on f5, because then I have knight c4 check, and I fork her rook and her king. Second of all, you can see here that if she goes bishop takes e4, I have knight c4 check, and I get a better version of what we had before, because now if she goes knight takes f5, I can protect my pawn, and she can never win the h6 pawn here, because my rook is guarding it. So my knight ends up on the edge of the board, but my rook is still guarding my pawn, and I have a passed pawn, and I should be winning. And if she tries to take the b7 pawn, this is still not great, because I can go knight takes b5, and here, like I still have an outside passed pawn with pretty good chances to win. So I missed this, and I went for the worst option out of all of them, which is knight d5. And you can see here that I end up 2 pawns, but with the quality of this h6 pawn and this b7 pawn, the odds of winning are just not very high. And Ashrita plays very strong defense here. She finds a very active defensive move, rook g3. Maybe if she played a move like rook b3, I could win because that would under rook with knight c5. But she realizes that she can defend actively, and after the next few moves, you can kind of see that I'm not really able to get anywhere, and the game ends in a draw. So that was my last game of the tournament. 2 wins, 7 draws. Overall, I would say it was a little bit disappointing. It wasn't the worst tournament. Obviously, I didn't lose any games, so I guess I'm pretty happy about that. But I did have a lot of chances where I could have pressed her. I could have pressed or gotten more, and I wasn't able to. I did save some lost positions as well, so that's a good thing. But yeah, definitely a lot of lessons to learn. My next major tournament is going to be on March 12th to 16th, so it's going to be in like around a week and a half. So I'm pretty excited for that tournament, and I'm going to do my best there, and I'll see you guys later. Bye bye.